My husband canceled our honeymoon the day of the flight to go with his mother to Bali, but when he left me home cleaning, I went to paradise alone, and what I did next left them speechless. I'm 27 years old. I work as a freelance graphic designer, and I need to tell this story because what happened a few months ago literally changed my entire life. And when I say entire, I mean entire. I guess I should start at the beginning. When I met Christopher like 3 years ago at a coffee shop near my office, it was one of those casual encounters you see in movies. You know, he ordered the same thing as me, and we started talking, and honestly, he seemed like an amazing guy. Funny, polite, with a stable job as an accountant at a big firm. We dated for almost 2 years before getting married, and during that time everything seemed perfect, or at least that's what I thought. My name is Rebecca, by the way, and I've always been the typical oldest daughter who tries to please everyone, that person who says yes to everything because she doesn't want to create conflicts or disappoint anyone. My parents, Richard and Mary, always told me I was too much of a people pleaser, that I needed to learn to set boundaries. But I never really listened to them because I thought being kind and considerate was the right thing to do. You know what I mean? During our relationship, Christopher introduced me to his family relatively early, like 3 months into dating. His mother, Diane, was intense, very intense, the type of person who has an opinion about absolutely everything and expects you to do things her way. The first time I went to dinner at their house, I spent the whole night nervous because she wouldn't stop asking me questions about my family, my work, my future plans, like I was in a job interview or something. Christopher told me afterward not to worry, that she was like that with everyone. But looking back, I should have seen it coming. Christopher's family was big and very close-knit, or so they said. There was his mother, Diane, his sister, Angela, who was like 2 years older than him and worked in something related to marketing, and several aunts and uncles and cousins who were always involved in everything. Every family event was a drama, you know. There was always someone arguing about something, or someone offended for some reason. I tried to stay out of it and be as nice as possible to everyone, smile and nod even when they said things I didn't agree with. My best friend Stephanie told me I looked like a robot when I was with them, and she was right. But I just wanted things to work out because I loved Christopher, and I thought eventually his family would accept me. When Christopher proposed to me like a year and a half ago, I was excited, like really happy because I thought we were finally going to start our own life together. The truth is, the wedding was a nightmare from the start of planning. Diane wanted to control absolutely everything, from the venue to the menu, the guest list, and even the color of the napkins. I wanted a small, intimate ceremony with our closest friends and immediate family, but we ended up with like 200 guests, most of them acquaintances of his family that I had never even seen before. My mother asked me several times if I was sure about all this, if I really wanted to get married under these circumstances, but I kept insisting that everything would be fine once we were married and living in our own house. The wedding day was beautiful, I can't deny that, but it didn't feel like my wedding, you know? It felt like Christopher's family's event, where I was just the bride. Angela gave a speech that was basically about how Christopher was the best brother in the world and how she hoped I would live up to the family's expectations, which was super awkward because who says that at a wedding? Diane cried during the entire ceremony, but not from happiness. It seemed more like she was losing her son in a war or something dramatic like that. My parents were there smiling and being kind as always, but I could see in their eyes that they were worried. Stephanie hugged me after the ceremony and whispered, "You're still in time to run away." And we both laughed, but part of me wondered if she was joking. After the wedding, we moved into an apartment that Christopher had found, not too far from where his family lived, which I wasn't too thrilled about, but, well, it was a good place and we could afford it together. We planned our honeymoon in Bali because it had always been my dream to go there, see the temples, the beaches, the culture. We spent months planning it, booked an incredible resort, bought the flights. I even bought new clothes specifically for the trip. I was super excited, like counting down the days because after all the wedding stress, we really needed that alone time to reconnect and start our married life the right way. And then the honeymoon day arrived. We had to leave for the airport at 3 in the afternoon. Our flight was at 6, I think, or maybe 6:30. And I already had everything packed from the night before because I'm one of those people who organizes everything in advance. Christopher came home from work at noon, and I thought he was coming to help me load the suitcases and get ready to go. But when he walked into the apartment, he had that face he makes when something is wrong. You know, like nervous but trying to act casual. He sat on the couch and told me, "We need to talk." and I immediately felt that something wasn't right, because nobody says we need to talk if the news is good. He sat there for what seemed like forever, looking at his phone, and finally dropped the bomb on me. He told me that his family had decided they also wanted to go to Bali, that they had basically taken control of our honeymoon and they were coming with us. I was in shock, literally couldn't process what I was hearing. I said, "What?" thinking I had misunderstood. But he continued explaining that his mother had always wanted to see Bali, and they thought it would be a good opportunity for a family trip. I still didn't understand why he was telling me this, in that way, like it was bad news, until he got to the part that completely destroyed me. He told me there was a problem with the number of rooms at the resort, that there wasn't enough space for everyone, and that his family had decided that I should stay home. And not only that, he told me that while they were in Bali, I should stay in the apartment doing household chores, cleaning, organizing, preparing the house for when he returned. I stood there with my suitcase beside me, my passport in hand, trying to understand if this was a cruel joke or if this was really happening. I asked him if he was serious, and he said yes, that his family had already bought the tickets and changed the reservations, and that they expected me to be understanding and supportive of this decision. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't. My chest felt like it was going to explode. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something at him, but I was so shocked that I just stood there staring at him. I told him, "This is our honeymoon, it's supposed to be our time together," and he responded that we would have time together later, that this was important for his family and that I had to understand that family always comes first. That phrase, "family always comes first," stuck in my mind because in that moment I understood that to him. I wasn't really part of his family. I was just an accessory. Something secondary that could be set aside when his mother and sister decided it should be. I went to the bedroom, closed the door, and sat there on the bed trying not to hyperventilate. My hands were shaking. I felt nauseous, and all I could think was, how did I get here? At what point did I allow things to get to this point? I heard Christopher moving around in the living room, probably calling his family to tell them mission accomplished, that he had told me and I was going to stay home like a good, obedient wife. But something in me broke at that moment. You know, like when you've been bending a branch, and suddenly it snaps in two. I got up, grabbed my suitcase, my passport, my credit card, and walked out of the room. Christopher was on the couch with his phone, probably texting his mother, and when he saw me with the suitcase, he asked me where I was going. I told him I was going on my honeymoon, alone, because I wasn't going to stay home playing Cinderella while he went to Bali with his family. He stood up and started telling me I was being dramatic, that I couldn't just leave like that I had responsibilities, and I simply told him, the only responsibility I have is to myself, and I left. I closed the door and went down the building stairs with my suitcase, making noise on each step, crying but also feeling strangely liberated. I went straight to the airport, but obviously I wasn't going to go to Bali alone. That would have been super weird and also really expensive to change everything. Instead, while I was waiting in line to talk to someone from the airline, I called my parents. My mother answered, and I told her everything. Absolutely everything. And she was furious, like angrier than I had seen her in years. She told me they had a vacation home in Maui that they had bought like 5 years ago and almost never used, and that I could go there for as long as I needed. My father got on the phone and told me to buy a ticket immediately, that they would cover it, and not to worry about anything else. So that's what I did. I changed my flight to Hawaii, and 3 hours later I was on a plane heading to Maui, instead of being locked in my apartment cleaning floors. The flight was surreal. Honestly, I was sitting there on the plane, still in shock from everything that had happened, but also feeling this strange sense of relief. For the first time in I don't know how long, I was going to do something completely for myself, without worrying about what Christopher or his family thought. The flight attendant asked me if I was okay because she probably noticed I had been crying, and I told her yes, that it had just been a long day, and she brought me a complimentary glass of wine, which was very kind of her. I arrived in Maui at like 11 at night, local time, and took an Uber to my parents' house, which was in a quiet area near the beach. The house was beautiful, like one of those Hawaiian-style houses with lots of wood and big windows, and when I walked in and saw the ocean through the back windows, I just broke down. I sat on the living room floor and cried for like an hour, getting out everything I had been holding in, all the frustration, the betrayal, the anger, everything. But after crying, I felt better, like lighter. You know what I mean? I took a long shower, put on comfortable clothes, and fell asleep listening to the ocean waves. I spent the next 2 weeks in that house, basically alone, and it was exactly what I needed. I disconnected from everything, turned off my phone most of the time, only turned it on once a day to send my parents a message telling them I was okay. My parents sent me supportive messages and told me to take all the time I needed, that they were proud of me for finally setting boundaries. I spent my days doing things I had never done, like taking surf lessons at the local beach, reading books I had wanted to read for years but never had time for, cooking elaborate meals just for myself, walking on the beach at sunset. It was like rediscovering myself, remembering who I was before becoming this compliant, submissive version who always said yes to everything. One night, like a week and a half into being there, I decided to turn on my phone completely, to see what had happened. Big mistake. I had literally hundreds of messages and missed calls from Christopher, from Diane, from Angela, and even from aunts and uncles and cousins I barely knew. The messages started out worried. Like, "Where are you? We're worried," but quickly became aggressive and demanding. Christopher wrote me that I had ruined his family's trip because everyone was upset and worried about me, as if that was my problem, that I was selfish and immature. Diane sent me messages saying I was a disgrace as a wife, that a good woman would never abandon her husband that way, and that I owed the whole family an apology. Angela was worse. She wrote me saying she always knew I wasn't good enough for her brother, that I came from a mediocre family, her exact words, and that Christopher deserved someone better. I read all those messages sitting on the porch of the house with a glass of wine, and instead of feeling guilty like they probably expected me to feel, I just got angrier. I got angry because not one of them, not a single one, took a second to wonder why I had left, or if maybe, just maybe, they had done something wrong. Everything was my fault. I was the bad one. I was the one who had to apologize. And that made me realize that this pattern was never going to change. If I went back and apologized, if I kept being the compliant Rebecca who accepts everything, I was going to live the rest of my life being this family's doormat. So I didn't respond. I turned off the phone again and enjoyed my last week in Maui in peace. I took pictures of the sunset, tried every ice cream flavor at a local ice cream shop, went to a farmer's market, and bought fruits I had never seen in my life. It was liberating, honestly. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself without having to act or pretend to be someone I wasn't. When I finally returned home, well, to the apartment I shared with Christopher, I knew things were going to be ugly. I took a flight back and arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Christopher wasn't in the apartment, probably still at work, so I started packing my essential things. I didn't want to take everything yet because I wasn't sure where I was going to stay, but I needed clothes, my important documents, my laptop, that kind of stuff. I called Stephanie, my best friend, and explained the whole situation to her. She got really angry, like yelling at me on the phone asking why I hadn't told her before, but she immediately told me I could stay with her for as long as I needed. While I was packing, Christopher arrived. He walked into the apartment and saw me with the suitcases and froze. For a moment, neither of us said anything. We just stood there looking at each other. Finally, he broke the silence and asked me where I had been. And I told him in Hawaii, on vacation, enjoying my honeymoon as I had originally planned. He turned red, literally red with rage, and started yelling at me about how dare I leave like that I had embarrassed his family, that his mother had cried for days, that his sister had told him she always knew I was problematic. I just kept packing, folding my clothes and putting them in the suitcase, and that made him angrier. He yelled at me to stop packing, that we needed to talk, but I told him there was nothing to talk about. I told to him that his family had disrespected me in the worst possible way, that he had allowed it to happen, and that I wasn't going to live like that. He told me I was exaggerating, that his family just wanted to spend time with him and that I was too sensitive. That was probably the worst part, that he completely minimized how I felt, like my emotions weren't valid or important. I finished packing, closed my suitcase, and told him I was going to stay at Stephanie's house for a while as I decided what to do. He asked me if I was saying I wanted a divorce, and I honestly didn't know at that moment, so I just told him I needed space. I went to Stephanie's house that night and she greeted me with wine, pizza, and lots of hugs. Her apartment was small but cozy, and I settled onto her sofa bed. That night we stayed up late talking about everything, and she told me something I'll never forget. She said, "Rebecca, I love you. You're my best friend, but I need to tell you something difficult. You've spent your whole life trying to be what others expect you to be, and look where that's gotten you. You're 27 years old and you're married to a man who treats you like an employee, not like his wife. You have to decide if you're going to keep living for others or if you're going to start living for yourself. Her words hit me hard because I knew she was right. I had spent my whole life being the good daughter, the good girlfriend, the good wife, without ever asking myself if that was what I really wanted. That night, I made a decision. Well, several decisions. First, I was going to move back in with my parents temporarily because I needed a stable and safe place. Second, I wasn't going to apologize to Christopher's family because I hadn't done anything wrong. And third, I was going to look for a divorce lawyer because I couldn't stay in that marriage anymore. A few days later, something happened that solidified my decision. Christopher's family, led by Diane and Angela, went to my parents' house. That's right. They went all the way there without warning, knocking on the door and demanding to speak to me. My mother called me hysterical, telling me there were like 6 people at her door, yelling and making a scene. The neighbors came out to see what was happening. It was huge drama. My father, who is normally the calmest person in the world, had to threaten to call the police to get them to leave. They said horrible things to me through the door, that I was a bad daughter for worrying my parents that way, that I had broken their family, that Christopher was devastated because of me. That was the last straw. That they came to harass my parents in their own home, that they caused a scene in front of their neighbors, that they tried to make them feel bad for supporting me. That was too much. I called Christopher that same night and left him a very clear voicemail. I told him that his family had crossed a line, that I wasn't going to tolerate them harassing my parents, and that if he really thought I should apologize to them after everything they had done, then he was crazier than I thought. I told him that the only way I would even consider talking to him was if his mother and sister gave me a sincere apology for their behavior, and that until that happened, I didn't want to know anything about any of them. As expected, that didn't happen. Instead of apologizing, Diane sent me a long message telling me she would never apologize because she hadn't done anything wrong, that as a mother she had the right to protect her son from a manipulative woman like me. Yes, she called me manipulative, and that if I really loved Christopher, I would put my pride aside and do the right thing. Angela sent me an even worse message, attacking my parents, saying they had obviously raised me wrong if I thought it was okay to abandon my husband, and other things I don't even want to repeat. Christopher said nothing, didn't defend me, didn't tell them to stop. He simply disappeared from the conversation. I moved in with my parents a week later. I picked up all my stuff from the apartment when Christopher was at work, left my keys on the kitchen table, and left. My parents welcomed me with open arms, obviously. My childhood room was still there, with some of my old stuff from college, and it felt weird but also safe to be back in that house. My mother made my favorite meal that night. My father hugged me and told me I would always have a place there, no matter what happened. For the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. One afternoon, like 2 weeks after moving in with my parents, I was at a coffee shop, working on my laptop, when a woman approached me. She was like my age, maybe a little older, and she asked me if I was Rebecca. I got a little scared because I didn't know her, but she quickly explained that her name was Pam and that she was Christopher's ex-girlfriend. I was shocked, literally didn't know what to say. She apologized for approaching me, like that, but told me she had heard through mutual friends that Christopher and I were getting divorced, and that she felt she had to talk to me. We sat down for coffee and Pam told me her story. She and Christopher had been together for 3 years, and basically the same thing that had happened to me had happened to her. Christopher's family, especially Diane, had completely controlled their relationship. Pam told me that Diane decided when they could see each other, where they could go on dates, even what Pam should study in college. When Pam finally tried to set boundaries and suggested to Christopher that they needed space from his family, Diane became hysterical and convinced Christopher that Pam was trying to alienate him from his family. Eventually, Pam ended the relationship because she couldn't take it anymore, and she told me it was the best decision she made in her life. Talking to Pam was revealing. It made me realize that this wasn't about me. It wasn't because I had done something wrong or because I wasn't enough. This was a pattern, a toxic family dynamic that had existed before me and would probably continue to exist with whoever Christopher was with next. Pam told me she saw signs of the same toxicity when she found out Christopher had gotten married, and that she had been worried about me but didn't know how to contact me. She gave me her number and told me that if I ever needed to talk or needed support, to call her. That conversation gave me the validation I needed to move forward with the divorce. I hired a lawyer, Jonathan Price, who had been recommended by a colleague of my father's. He was an older guy, like 55 years old, with a lot of experience in divorces. When I told him the whole story, he leaned back in his chair, took off his glasses, and told me, "Rebecca, I've seen many cases in my career, and let me tell you that you made the right decision. This is a family dynamic that would never change, and you deserve better." We started the divorce process immediately. Since we had no children and hadn't been married for even 6 months, Jonathan assured me the process would be relatively simple and quick. The problem was that Christopher didn't want to sign the papers. Jonathan explained to me that legally he couldn't avoid the divorce indefinitely, but that he could complicate the process by refusing to sign and asking for extensions. And that was exactly what he did. Every time Jonathan sent him the papers, Christopher found some excuse not to sign them, or asked for ridiculous changes, or simply ignored them. Weeks went by like this, with Christopher playing legal games while I just wanted to close that chapter of my life. Things came to a head when I went to Stephanie's birthday party, like 2 months after starting the divorce process. It was a small gathering at a local bar, just her, me, and like 15 other friends. We were having a good time, laughing, drinking, basically me feeling like a normal person, for the first time in months. And then Christopher showed up. I don't know how he knew I was there, if it was a coincidence or if someone told him, but he walked into the bar at like 10 at night and came straight to our table. The atmosphere changed immediately. Stephanie stood up and told him to leave, that he wasn't invited, but Christopher completely ignored her and started yelling at me in the middle of the bar. He yelled at me about how dare I be there, having fun while he was suffering, that I was destroying his life, that he had never loved me and had only married me for my money, which was absurd because I made more than him, and other horrible things. There was a guy at our table, a friend of Stephanie's named Mike or Matt, I don't remember well, who basically told Christopher to calm down, and Christopher completely lost his mind. He accused him of being my lover, screamed that I had cheated on him, that's why I wanted the divorce, and tried to grab him by the neck. The bar security had to intervene and basically drag Christopher outside while he kept screaming. It was humiliating, terrifying, and completely surreal. Stephanie was furious. The other guests were in shock, and I was shaking. When we left the bar, I called my parents and told them what had happened. My father told me to come home immediately, that he was going to call the police and report the incident. But before doing that, I decided to make one more call. I called Diane. Yes, Christopher's mother. She answered with that condescending tone she always used with me and asked me what I wanted. I told her very clearly that her son had just made a violent scene in a public place, that he had physically threatened another person, and that I had like 20 witnesses who had seen it. I told her that if Christopher didn't sign the divorce papers immediately, and if his family didn't stop harassing me and my parents, I was going to request a restraining order, and that, with the witnesses and evidence I had, it wasn't going to be difficult to get it. And here's the important part. I told her that a restraining order for domestic violence or harassment would show up on his record, and that would probably ruin his career at the accounting firm where he worked. There was silence on the other end of the line for what seemed like forever. Finally, Diane told me in a tone I had never heard from her, calmer, but also colder, that she was going to talk to Christopher. She hung up without saying anything more. 2 days later, Jonathan called me saying that Christopher had signed all the papers without making any changes, without asking for anything. He just signed them. The divorce process officially began, and Jonathan told me that in a few months I would be legally free. It's been like 4 months since Christopher signed the papers, and the divorce is almost finalized. Jonathan is handling all the paperwork and keeping me updated. Christopher and his family haven't contacted me since that call with Diane, which is a huge relief. I still live with my parents and I'm saving up to get my own place. Something completely mine where I can start over. My freelance business is going well. I even got some new clients last month. Stephanie is still my best friend and she constantly tells me how proud she is of me for finally standing up for myself. Last week I was organizing some boxes in my room at my parents' house, and I found my wedding dress stored in a bag. I took it out, looked at it for a moment, and felt nothing. No sadness, no anger, no regret. I simply folded it, put it back in the bag, and decided I was going to donate it. My mother walked into the room right at that moment and asked me if I was okay. I told her yes, that I was more than okay, and it was true. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself, without having to pretend or act to please anyone else. And that's enough for now, I guess.